All right, today we are jumping into one of the most well-known stories on the planet, the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, specifically from the Gospel of Mark. But I need you to stick with me on this because this ancient story has a twist you probably never saw coming, a real textual mystery that might just change how you see the whole thing.
I mean, seriously, what if the story you've heard your whole life isn't how it was originally written? That's the big question we're tackling today as we look at the oldest account of the most pivotal event in Christianity.
So, where do we start? We start at the crucifixion. Now you have to picture this. It wasn't some private, hidden event. It was a public spectacle, a Roman execution designed to be a brutal warning. And you better believe every detail Mark includes is there for a reason.
Now this is fascinating. The sign nailed above Jesus' head was standard practice for Roman crucifixions. But in this case, it's also a savage political jab from the Roman governor, Pilate. He's not just stating a crime, he's totally mocking the Jewish leaders, turning this horrific execution into a twisted, sarcastic coronation. And the mockery, it doesn't stop with Pilate. Mark paints this picture of just absolute, total abandonment. Everyone gets in on it. Random people walking by, the top religious leaders, and get this, even the two guys being crucified right next to him. Jesus is completely, utterly alone.
And this leads us to one of the most profound ironies in the entire book. See, a thing Mark does is have people say things that are true in ways they could never understand. And this is the ultimate example. The chief priests are yelling, "He's saved others, he can't even save himself." And for anyone reading Mark's story, the reaction is, yes, that's the whole point. It's precisely by not saving himself that he is, in that very moment, saving others.
Okay, so as the scene hits its absolute peak, the human mockery kind of fades into the background and something cosmic starts to happen. The sky itself changes and Jesus speaks his final words.
Think about this. From noon to 3 in the afternoon, the brightest part of the day, a deep darkness just falls over the entire land. Now, for Mark's original audience, this would have been a massive signal. It's straight out of the Old Testament prophecies about the day of the Lord, a sign of divine judgment. This wasn't just a weird eclipse, this was God making a statement.
Then Jesus cries out in Aramaic, his native language, and Mark very intentionally keeps the original words here. Why? To help us understand the crowd's confusion. They hear Eloi, and they think he's calling for the prophet Elijah to come rescue him. It's a detail that would be totally lost in translation.
But here's the thing. Jesus isn't just crying out in pain, and he's definitely not calling for Elijah. He is quoting the very first line of Psalm 22. Now, in that culture, quoting the first line of a psalm was like a shortcut. It was meant to bring the entire psalm to mind. And this is just brilliant because Psalm 22 is a journey. It starts in the absolute depths of despair with that feeling of being abandoned, but it doesn't stay there. It moves into a declaration of trust, and then it ends with this huge, triumphant vision of God's victory being proclaimed to all the nations of the world. So what sounds like a cry of defeat is actually a profound claim of future victory.
The second Jesus dies, the whole narrative shifts. Mark immediately cuts to the consequences, the dramatic payoff to everything that has been building up to this point.
As soon as he breathes his last, two incredibly important things happen back to back. One is divine, the other is completely human. Mark sets it up like a perfect cause and effect.
First, the curtain in the Jerusalem temple, this massive, thick veil separating the holiest place, is ripped in two, from top to bottom. The symbolism is undeniable. The barrier between God and humanity is gone. And second, at that very same moment, a Roman centurion, a hardened soldier who's probably overseen hundreds of these executions, has a stunning realization. And he says, truly, this man was the Son of God. You have to understand how huge this is. It is the very first time in the entire Gospel of Mark that a human being makes this confession and isn't immediately told to be quiet. The whole story has been building to this climax. Mark is showing us that it's only by looking at the cross that anyone can finally understand who Jesus really is. And Mark, being a masterful writer, creates this incredible literary frame. At Jesus' baptism, at the very beginning, the heavens are torn open. A voice from God declares who he is, and a psalm is quoted. Now here, at his death, the temple veil is torn open, a voice from a human declares who he is, and a psalm is quoted. It's a perfect, deliberate parallel. Just amazing.
Okay, so now the story jumps ahead to Sunday morning. A small group of women who had followed Jesus are making their way to the tomb to properly anoint his body.
Now, Mark is very careful here. He's like a journalist establishing the facts. 1. Pilate officially confirmed Jesus was dead. 2. He was buried in a proper tomb sealed with a giant stone. And 3. This is crucial. The women saw with their own eyes exactly where he was laid. Mark adds this detail to shoot down any idea that they just got confused and went to the wrong tomb.
When they get there, the stone is already rolled away. And inside, a young man dressed in white gives them a very clear message. He has risen. He is not here. And then he gives them an equally clear command. Go tell his disciples, and he even singles out Peter, that Jesus is going ahead of them to Galilee. You'll see him there.
Okay, so everything is set up for a triumphant reunion, right? The news is out, a clear command has been given, but this is where the story takes a shocking turn, revealing that textual mystery we hinted at from the start.
So let's recap. They've just received the best news in the history of the world, and they have been given a direct order to go and share it. The next step seems pretty obvious, doesn't it?
And that's where the book ends. And they went out and fled from the tomb. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Full stop. That's it. According to the oldest and most reliable ancient manuscripts we have, this is the original ending of Mark's Gospel. The women flee in terror, they disobey the command, and they stay silent. The end.
Now, if you're grabbing your Bible thinking, wait a minute, mine has more verses, you're right. But almost all scholars agree that those extra verses 9 through 20 were added much, much later by scribes who were probably just as uncomfortable with this abrupt ending as we are. The evidence is overwhelming. The oldest manuscripts don't have them, and the writing style and vocabulary are completely different from the rest of the book. It reads like a summary of the other Gospels tacked on at the end.
So what really happened here? Did Mark fully intend to end his story on this shocking note of fear and failure? Or, as some scholars like Dr. Jennings theorize, did the original ending get lost somewhere in the fog of history? There's even a cool idea that maybe bits and pieces of Mark's true ending were saved because Matthew used them when he wrote his gospel. It turns this whole thing into a fascinating piece of historical detective work.
And that leaves us right here with this unsettling thought. Whether Mark's ending was intentional or it was lost, the earliest version we have access to concludes not with a glorious reunion, but with raw human fear, failure, and silence. So we have to ask ourselves, if a story this important originally ended this way, how does that change the message we thought we knew?